Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Matt Bruck. This is Guitar World's Tech Education on CD-ROM. Okay, so today's segment is all about truss rods. Truss rods are in almost every single electric guitar neck, acoustic guitar neck that you can imagine. And what they are, they're metal rods, and you can tighten them or you can loosen them. The reason truss rods exist is because wood moves, it changes its shape. It changes its shape depending on moisture, depending on tension, how high you tune the guitar, how low you tune the guitar, etc. So what a truss rod does is it compensates for any movement that might occur in the neck as a counterbalance. So if the neck rises up, you can slack out the truss rod and lower the tension. If the neck bows, you can increase the tension and bring it back. It's basically like a counter force to stabilize any types of changes that occur in the neck over time. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to bring my friend Chip Ellis in, and we're going to explain truss rod adjustment on several types of guitars like acoustics, Les Pauls, Stratocasters, because they all adjust different, and but the concept is the same. So let's get Chip in here and let's show you how it's done. So like I was saying, truss rods counterbalance any kind of movement in a neck that might occur due to moisture or tension of strings. Another reason you would want to adjust a truss rod is to get the action height of the string in relationship to the fretboard in a comfortable place. So there's a lot of reasons to adjust them. They don't get adjusted all that often if it's not something that you're familiar with or that you feel qualified for. I would let somebody professional do a truss rod adjustment for you, but for today's sake and a demonstration, we just want to take you through how truss rods get adjusted, how you access them. To get at truss rods, you need access. So there's a few tools that are really important. We have them here. Why don't you explain a little bit about the tools, Chip?
The nut drivers are for a truss rod, like in a Gibson Les Paul, where you have a hex nut on the end of the truss rod. Fender style guitars use something like this, a Phillips head. It's good to have a long handled one because sometimes you need this handle to clear the hardware on the guitar. So a nice long shaft helps that. And a little Phillips screwdriver for something like a Gibson to get the truss rod cover off so you can access the truss rod adjustment nut.
I have a 74 Les Paul here. Les Pauls are really fun to work on because with truss rod adjustments, because or I should say they're really not a big deal to work on. They're very easy to access and they're very easy to tweak. In the case of this guitar, truss rod is located at the headstock. So the first thing you would do would be to take off the truss rod cover. To get access to the truss rod. Boom, there is the truss rod. So, like Chip said, you need a nut driver. In the case of a Les Paul, it would be a 5/16 nut driver, and it would slip onto the truss rod adjustment right here. If your neck is bowed back this way, you would want to increase the tension, which would be in a clockwise motion. If your neck was bowed up, you would want to release the tension, which would be counterclockwise. And one thing Chip was saying before we started today was that when it comes to tightening a truss rod, don't overdo it, right?
No, because in a lot of cases, there's some guitars where you can pull the truss rod out and replace it, but it's costly. A lot of times, if you do strip out a truss rod, you might as well buy a new neck.
What happens when you over tighten is you either strip out the nut right here, or in the worst case scenario, you'll actually snap the truss rod. And truss rods to replace are major surgery, something you definitely don't want to get into.
Especially with like a Gibson Les Paul, because Gibson uses brass nuts. Very soft metal. It'll strip very easily on you if you go overboard on it.
That's basically the premise for a Les Paul. Like I said, it's different for a Strat, it's different for an acoustic, so let's get those guitars in now and show you how it's done. So on a Strat, it's a different situation from a Les Paul. Traditional Strat truss rod adjustment is located just under the fretboard in the neck pocket, which presents a pain in the ass situation because standard Strats, unless they've got some type of cutout, you have to take the neck off the guitar to adjust the truss rod. So let's show you how it's done. Okay, so now you got the neck off, which reveals the truss rod adjustment. This sits right inside the neck pocket, and like I said, there's no way to get to it unless you take off the neck. So once again, if your neck is slacking, then you want to tighten it up. If your neck is a little over, coming up closer to the strings, you want to loosen it. But that's where the adjustment exists. So you make your adjustment, and then you just put the neck back into the pocket. By the way, this is a really cool thing that Chip did, where he got access to the truss rod on a Strat without having to take the strings off, by loosening them and then tightening the lock nuts so that the strings don't move, letting us unbolt the neck plate and get access to the truss rod adjustment. So you would make your adjustment and then put it back together.
Good enough. One thing that's helpful to have on hand when you're setting your truss rod is a straight edge. And your truss rod, the amount of bow in the neck should only be read while there's full string tension on the neck. If you don't have a straight edge, one helpful trick you can do is actually use the string on the guitar as a straight edge. You can fret it at the first fret and push down at the last fret and kind of look in the middle of the fretboard and see if there's a gap between the underneath of the string and the top of your fret. What I usually do on a guitar like this is I'll set it dead flat and then just back off a little bit so you can barely see a little bit of space underneath that string to the top of that fret. When you're using your string for a straight edge like this, when you do fret it at the first fret and the last fret and you're looking for that gap between the string and the fret, one thing you can do is use your thumb to kind of tap on it to see it, and that'll kind of put things in perspective for you, so you know if it needs more adjustment, less adjustment, so on and so forth. The gap that you see when you're doing this between the string and the top of the fret is the gap, which is the height of the action with the bow in the neck.
Okay, so with Chip holding the first fret and the last fret and pressing down with his thumb on the string, the distance it takes for him to push that string down to the fret, the distance in between, is the height of the string off of the fretboard. So if you like low action, you would want to have a very little space to push down to hit the fret. If you like a higher action, you would like maybe a little bit more back bow in your neck, a little bit of what's called relief, and you'd feel it would take you longer to press down the string to hit the fret.
Right now we're going to discuss the truss rod in an acoustic, which is very similar to the one that we looked at in the Les Paul. Access to it is the same. One thing about acoustic, though, is that you might want a little bit more relief in the neck than you would on an electric guitar.
Why is that?
Well, on an electric guitar, the action, you want it lower. A little bit of buzz in an electric isn't going to be amplified. You might hear a little bit of it, but on an acoustic, where you're listening to the natural tones of the guitar, any fret buzz is very noticeable. So you might want more relief in the neck, so your notes down here ring clearer than would on an electric guitar.
Gotcha. So these are the basic ins and outs, the basic premise of truss rod adjustment. This isn't a very in-depth segment. It's basically meant to give you an overview education to why they are, why they exist, and how we use them. Like I said, if you're not experienced in something like this, in adjusting a truss rod, I wouldn't roll the dice or gamble on doing it yourself the first time. I'd take it to a qualified repair person. You raised the point that
It might be a good idea to ask your repair person if you can look over his shoulder while he does it. A lot of guys have no problem with that whatsoever. And it'd be good to learn how it's done, save you some money in the long run.
Definitely. The main two principles behind a truss rod are counterbalancing any kind of movement that occurs in the wood, and probably more importantly is the action height adjustment of your string. You can alter the action height adjustment of your truss rod. So I hope you found it helpful. I hope you found it informative. I want to thank you for being with me today, as
pleasure.
always. And hope you enjoyed the segment. See you next month.